Long ago, in a peaceful and prosperous kingdom, there lived a king and queen who had everything their hearts desired. Everything except a child. Though their palace was filled with gold, laughter, and loyal subjects, a deep longing echoed through its grand halls, a longing for a little one to complete their joy. One quiet winter afternoon, the queen sat by her window, weaving a soft sweater with gentle hands. Snow fell silently outside, blanketing the world in white. As she worked, a small bird fluttered near the sill, chirping sweetly. She raised her hand to shoo it away, but in that fleeting moment, the needle slipped, and a sharp prick drew a few drops of her blood. The crimson drops fell softly upon the snow-covered windowsill. She looked down, and, struck by the beauty of the contrast, red on white, she closed her eyes and whispered a wish. "I wish for a daughter, with lips as red as this blood, hair as black as ebony, and skin as white as the snow." And as if the heavens heard her prayer, the queen soon found herself expecting a child. The king and queen rejoiced, for the miracle they had waited so long for was finally within reach. But joy and sorrow often walk hand in hand. Not long after giving birth to a beautiful baby girl, just as she had wished, the queen fell gravely ill. Despite the best efforts of healers and caretakers, her light began to fade. And with one final loving gaze at her newborn child, she slipped away, leaving behind a legacy of love and a daughter whose name would become legend: Snow White. After the queen's death, the baby girl was lovingly named Snow White, just as her mother had wished, for her lips were as red as a rose, her hair as black as ebony, and her skin as white as snow. The king, heartbroken yet hopeful, continued to raise the little girl with all the love he had. But time moved on, and one day, he remarried. His new queen was elegant, proud, and filled with vanity. She was no ordinary woman. She was a sorceress with a heart as cold as ice, and a mirror that whispered secrets no one else could hear. Each day she stood before it and asked in a voice smooth as silk but sharp as glass, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" And each day the mirror answered, "You, my queen, are the fairest of all." She smiled, satisfied. But envy is a seed that grows in silence. Years passed. Snow White blossomed into a radiant young girl. By the time she was only 7 years old, her beauty outshone the stars. One morning, the queen asked her mirror again, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" But this time the mirror did not speak her name. It whispered, "Snow White." The queen's smile vanished. Her heart burned with rage. How could a child be fairer than a queen? Blinded by jealousy, she summoned her most loyal huntsman, a man of strength, trained to follow orders without question. "Take Snow White into the forest," she commanded. "Tell her to pick the magical midnight flowers, and when she is far from the castle, end her life." The huntsman obeyed and led Snow White deep into the dark woods. The little girl, unaware of her fate, wandered joyfully among the trees in search of the enchanted flowers. But when the moment came, the huntsman looked into her eyes, pure, innocent, filled with wonder. His hands trembled, his blade lowered, and instead of taking her life, he dropped to his knees and said, "Run, child, run as fast as you can, and never return to the castle." Snow White's eyes widened in fear. Without another word, she turned and vanished into the shadows of the forest. To protect himself, the huntsman knew he needed proof. He killed a buffalo from the wild, tore out its heart, and returned it to the queen. "Here, your majesty," he said, "the heart of Snow White." The queen believed him. And Snow White, she disappeared into the dark woods, her fate uncertain, her story only just beginning. Deep in the heart of the enchanted forest, Snow White wandered, lost, tired, and afraid. Trees whispered secrets as the wind danced between the leaves, and every shadow seemed to watch her with curious eyes. Just as her strength began to fade, she saw it. A tiny cottage nestled between the trees, its windows glowing faintly in the twilight. With trembling hands, she knocked. There was no answer. She gently pushed the door open and stepped inside. The place was small, much smaller than the grand halls of her father's castle, but it was warm, cozy, and filled with mystery. In the centre of the room stood a round wooden table, and on it were 7 small plates, each filled with delicious-looking vegetables. Snow White's eyes widened with wonder. "Who could live here?" she whispered. She tiptoed through the cottage and entered a little room, one even smaller than she had imagined. Inside, she found 7 tiny beds, each perfectly made, lined up in a neat row. Tired and hungry, Snow White nibbled a bit of food from the plates. Then, curling up on one of the beds, she closed her eyes and drifted into a peaceful sleep. But peace doesn't last long in enchanted forests. Not long after, the owners of the cottage returned home. 7 dwarfs, each with a beard longer than the last, eyes bright with curiosity and kindness. As they stepped inside, they noticed something strange. "Someone's been eating our food," said one. "And someone's been sleeping in my bed," exclaimed another. They tiptoed into the bedroom. And there, lying under their covers, was a little girl with hair like night and skin like snow. Snow White slowly opened her eyes and gasped. She jumped up, frightened by the tiny strangers staring back at her. But the dwarfs meant no harm. They saw the fear in her eyes and the kindness in her voice as she explained her story, how the queen had tried to kill her, and how she had run for her life. The dwarfs listened closely, then whispered among themselves. At last they turned to her and smiled. "You may stay here with us," they said, "but in return, you must help us keep the cottage clean, cook our meals, and knit warm sweaters for us before winter comes." Grateful and relieved, Snow White agreed. "I promise," she said softly, "I will take care of your home and of all of you." And so the next morning, as the sun rose through the trees, the dwarfs waved goodbye and marched off to work. Meanwhile, Snow White stayed behind. She swept the cottage floors, folded the tiny beds with care, stirred pots of stew over the fire, and began knitting soft woolen sweaters, each one stitched with love. For the first time in days, she felt safe, but far away in the castle, danger had not forgotten her. Disguised in dark rags and a wicked smile, the evil witch slowly approached the cozy cottage deep in the forest. In her hand, a shiny red apple, cursed with poison. Snow White, innocent and kind, opened the door. "Try this sweet apple, my dear. It will make you feel better," whispered the witch. With one bite, Snow White collapsed to the ground, lifeless. The forest fell silent. When the 7 dwarfs returned, they were heartbroken. They built a crystal coffin and placed her gently inside, hoping her beauty and soul would live on. 3 days passed. A young prince riding through the forest saw the sleeping maiden in the glass coffin. He stepped forward, tears in his eyes. "She must not be forgotten. I will build a monument in her memory," he said softly. But as he leaned down and kissed her gently, something magical happened. Her eyes fluttered open. Snow White was alive. The evil of the poisonous apple was destroyed by the power of true love.